I'm here to declare that there is no relevance to be found in the pursuit of fame, power, wealth, affluence, or any of the things that we human chase down. I've tried all the paths in life and found that there's nothing at the end of them. And if my testimony isn't strong enough, I've been around the affluent plenty to know that there is nothing at the end of their paths either. Just think about it logically. How many celebrities have you watched on television self-destruct when they finally get to what we would all think is the ultimate position? I've been around Hollywood celebrities who feel that they need to take drugs, who feel that they need to destroy their lives, who can't be content with relationships, so they destroy their personal relationships with spouses and family and everything else. They self-destruct because they finally get to the point where they thought they would have relevance, and when they find it isn't there, they self-destruct. See, you and I may think that if we have the Ferrari, we'll be happy. And as long as we've never had the Ferrari, how would we know? But if we begin to look at people who've had the Ferraris and who've had the Bentleys and who've had everything else and had all the fame and fortune in their life, look at their lives, see how empty they are. We can learn a big lesson from them. And last night we talked about King Solomon, wisest guy in the world, the richest guy in the world. After he reviewed all the huge accomplishments that he made, he said the whole thing was vanity, it was a waste of time, it was futile. We don't want that. I don't want that. That was a frustrating part of my life because I tried to pursue relevance through accomplishment, through money, through power, through position, through self-glorification. I tried that. And I found that every time I reached a goal, I was not satisfied, so I had to immediately set a higher goal to achieve that one. And when I got there, I got better at making even quicker goals at a higher level, and I kept reaching all these goals, and here's what happens. When you begin to set multiple goals and reach multiple goals, you begin to run out of options. You begin to run out of the things that in your mind may finally bring you relevance. You know, the most desperate people in the world are the billionaires, because I've been around them. They have run out of options for relevance. And I shared the story last night about the Hong Kong billionaire. You know what I shared? I shared him this analogy. I said, you know what your life is like? Your life is like a 1,000-piece puzzle. It's true. The day you were conceived in your mother's womb, it was the puzzle was thrown out on a table. And in that 1,000-piece puzzle, when it's put together, it's a beautiful scene of mountains and meadows and a river. It's gorgeous. And with your affluence, I told him, you have the power and the ability to put that puzzle together very quickly. But I said, when the cells begin to multiply in your mother's womb, and you become a fetus, and finally you're born, is the puzzle complete? And he agreed, no, it's not complete. I said, you're right, it isn't complete. Maybe just the perimeter is formed. But with your affluence and your power, you can put the pieces together. And I said, I want to tell you what your life is like. You've put all the pieces together, and here's this beautiful scene, mountains, meadows, river. But you know what's wrong with your puzzle? There's one piece missing in the middle, and you can't find it. What do you see now? Do you see the beautiful scenery, or do you see the hole in the middle, the smallest little piece? I said, I guarantee all you see is the hole in the middle. And I said, and everybody's like that. And so we begin to try to figure out, how can we make this piece? We can't find it. It's not around. How do we make this piece? So we try to paint our own. We try to cut the pieces out, and we try to plug in things. Maybe we try drugs. Maybe we try dump our spouses and try to find another spouse. Try to find happiness. Buy more vacation homes, whatever. We try all these things to just get that thing complete. Because all we can see is that one little hole in the middle, not the rest of the puzzle. That is what irrelevance is. That was my life for 38 years. But not only did I not find relevance in my path of pursuing popularity, accomplishment, fame, whatever I was after, I wasn't finding relevance there. I quickly found out that it's a dead-end street. But the other avenue that I had, that of being a churchgoer, having a assumed belief that God is real, gave me just as much frustration as my pursuit of happiness and relevance through material things. My dad was a preacher. That should have given me a lot of advantage in terms of understanding what God can offer, but it didn't. I went to Christian schools from grade 1 through college, and I finished college still empty. And I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm young. Maybe it's going to come around. Maybe one of these days when I become an adult, when I'm finished all this, then I will understand. Then I'll understand what it means to be a Christian, because it sure hasn't happened now. It wasn't serving me. It wasn't relevant. It was a waste of time. So when I finished school, went into a community. Oh yeah, I had my rebellious time like a lot of people do. As a preacher's kid, after all, I had to make sure that the reputation of preacher's kids remained intact after I left, so I had to have my little spell of rebellion. But I decided that I was the loser at that, so I came back. But anyways, when I finished school and entered working life, I got involved in church life. And I thought, this is probably where it'll happen in my life, because it certainly hasn't happened up to me. It was frustrating to think that there is a God, to read scriptural references that said that this life is supposed to be abundant, frustrated me because it wasn't. It wasn't abundant. It didn't give me the supercharged feeling I thought it would. I wasn't finding relevance out there chasing material things, and I wasn't finding relevance in the church, and I wasn't finding relevance in trying to serve God, because I got into a church and I began taking on jobs in the church. And the more I did, the more frustrated I got. I became disillusioned. There were times where I wondered, is God real? And yet I kept at the task, because that's what it was for me, is a task. Keep going to church. Keep doing things. And meanwhile, I'm in business. And like I said last night, our business exploded, it took off. But I didn't tell the rest of the story. Along with driving Mercedes, Porsches, and BMWs and having all the material things that I wanted to heap on myself that I thought would bring relevance, which didn't, my pride got completely out of control as well. I had to cradle my head. It was so big from all the accomplishments. And that was frustrating, and that was irrelevant. But then God had a big lesson for my brothers and I. In the middle of everything being successful, of having everybody think we're unbelievable businessmen, in the middle of all that, all of a sudden, the market in the field where we were in turned down. Oh, who cares? I mean, we got lots of money. We can cover any little bit of temporary losses, but you know what? They weren't temporary losses. The 1990, we weathered the high interest rates of the mid-80s. But that was just a precursor. That was basically eroding our stability, so that when the real crunch came, it didn't take us but 1 year. And we went from flying high to having sheriffs coming and wanting to confiscate parts of our plants. And not only that, I had bailiffs coming to my door wanting to take, because hey, we personally guaranteed loans. Bailiffs coming to my house trying to take vehicles and furniture and everything else. You don't want to know what it's like to go from thinking you're it to having that happen to you? That's what I call humility. That's what I call the erosion of pride in a fast order. And you want to talk about bitter? As we began to descend, I started cutting deals with God. I've always cut deals with God. But God never listened. He's a poor deal maker. Here's how my deals went. God, if you do this, I'll give you this percentage of the profits of the business. But it didn't work. So I upped the ante. Okay, we'll give you 20% if you do this. Then 30, 40. And as we began to financially bite it, I got to the point where you can have the whole thing. Just leave us alone. We'll give you the whole business. Aren't we generous? But God never responded to any of those deals, because it seemed biblical to me that I say, God, if you do this, I will do this. It's exactly opposite the way I found out, the way God works. God never gives that. He never promises that which you haven't already given. That's what I finally figured out. You give it first, then he returns it and fills your cup up. That's what I discovered later on. Forgive, and then you'll be forgiven. Draw nigh unto me, and then I'll draw nigh unto you. Give, and then I will give. I had it all backwards, and so I cut all these deals. And so when the business caved in, and now we have the humility of having neighbors watch bailiffs come to take stuff away, I began to get very disillusioned in whether God was even real or not. My brothers said literally, and it's probably a tough word, but they said, "Screw you, God," and they just said, "I'm out of here." And I oscillated from that choice to maybe there's something. I couldn't get any more than maybe there's something, but I'd oscillate from I've had enough of this to that, and I hung in there for literally several months, deciding whether I should bag it or stick with it. And the days that I thought about sticking with it, I thought, well, maybe I'm supposed to learn something here. Maybe God's teaching me a lesson. What could it be? Well, it didn't take me a long time to finally figure it out. When you're living humbly now, and you look back on your life when you're driving all the fancy cars and the boats and everything else, it didn't take me long to recognize I needed a big lesson in what pride will do to you, how pride will erode your life, how pride will never bring you satisfaction in life. And so we went belly up. And we owed the bank $250,000 after we're done liquidating our plants. And yeah, it would have been easy just to go bankrupt, but my dad says, no. He says, you borrowed the money from the bank, you pay it back. So we went to the bank and we said, well, we don't know how we're going to pay it back. They said, well, get on a payment schedule. We said, are you kidding? We don't even know where we're going to make money. So we told them, we'll just do what we can. So, we started making payments, working hard, and we'd throw $10,000 here and $15,000 in there, whatever, paying the bank off. A couple of years, they left us alone. Finally, when there's $50,000 left at the bank, this is principal only, not interest, we get a phone call from the bank manager, and we thought, oh yeah, wouldn't it be just like the bank to call the note now after you've knocked off $200,000 of principal? Bank manager calls us in. We're nervous because we don't know what this is all about. There's a whole room full of bankers. And the bank manager says, we know you guys knew you could have shafted us and gone bankrupt and left us sitting with that bill. You didn't. We're giving you an envelope today, forgiving you for everything that's left, including all the interest. What a blessing to get out of that. By then, I decided I wanted to start an engineering firm. I started an engineering firm. It exploded immediately. It just took off. I had so much business, I had to turn business away. I had the luxury of just taking whatever I wanted. And that's when, as I said last night, we started planting a church. My life was still spiritually frustrated. I was finding no relevance in material things. I was finding no relevance in my Christian walk. And so I thought, if I do something big for God, maybe he'll reciprocate and do something for me. So we planted this church. And as I shared last night, my biggest problem with that was the frustration of watching other people come to church and find something I didn't have, and I was jealous. I had animosity to the very people that I was attempting to serve. And then something else happened. I had been in the engineering firm for about a year and a half that I started. It was doing super well. We started the church. Yeah, I spent a lot of time working on this church, putting time into it. But all of a sudden, all the jobs dried up. I couldn't buy a job. I knew there was something wrong with this. Wasn't the fact that I had failures. Didn't have any failures. I knew God was now doing something to try to teach me a lesson. I thought, what? What do you want this time? I learned the pride thing. I don't have those aspirations anymore, and honestly, I didn't. What is it you're trying to teach me this time? Trying to start cutting deals with God again. They weren't working. Keep running the church. 10 months into running this church, I'm now broke again. I've used up all my lines of credit. I don't have any more money left. I can't buy a job. I used to build houses with my brothers when we were going through university, so I knew how to do that. And I knew that in the middle of the winter time in British Columbia, nobody wants to put foundations in, mucking around a hole in the ground, putting in forms and pouring concrete. Who would want to do that? So that was really easy. I went out and tendered a few jobs and started groveling around the mud, putting foundations in from flying high. Mr. Everybody in the world wants my engineering skills, and now nobody wants them. I'm beginning to get super disillusioned now because nothing is working to bring me relevance. And I get to the point one morning where I'd had it. I decided before I walk away on this God that I'm assuming is real, because that's all it was just an assumption. Oh yeah, my parents always taught me God was real. I read books that God's real, and I heard people say God's real, and I heard people say that this is the abundant life, and even though it wasn't, I got to the point where I needed to make one last attempt, and that was it. I'm out of here, because I just didn't want to walk away without at least making one last deal with God, because none of the other deals worked. So I made this deal with God. I said, here's the deal. I'm going to get up every morning now, and I'm going to spend 1 hour reading my Bible and praying. If you don't come to me shortly, I'm out of here. I don't want anything more to do with you. I'm broke. I'm trying to make a living groveling and putting in foundations in the middle of winter. I cut this deal with God. I get up the next morning. I'm excited. 5:30 in the morning. I'm not excited about getting up at 5:30 in the morning. I don't like that part at all. I'm one of those type people. I'd rather go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning and get up at 10 in the morning. I'm just slightly out of sync with society. But that's the way I am. So for me to have the alarm go off at 5:30 in the morning when I don't really have to go to work anytime I don't want to because I'm sort of self-employed was a tough deal. But I got up the next morning with anticipation because I thought this is probably the deal God wants. He's probably going to come to me and there's going to be something really special happens this next morning. I get up at 5:30 in the morning. I start praying. Got about 3, 4, 5 minutes of prayer in and couldn't think of anything else to pray about, so that was done. So I thought, okay, it's time to read the Bible. So I start reading the Bible. You know what happened? Zero. I couldn't comprehend anything. I'm just reading and rereading the same words and trying to grasp a meaning out of anything and nothing. And I had a terrible day because I was so let down. I got up the next morning. Here's the deal I'd cut with God. He's supposed to be coming to me. So I thought, well, okay, maybe he wants me to dig a little bit. Okay, so tomorrow morning will be it. The alarm goes off. Oh, I wanted to hit the snooze button, but I thought, no, this is a deal I've cut. I'm going to get up. So I got up again. I got zero, absolutely zero out of it that morning. But something happened. A couple hours after I got zero out of it, the phone rang. And it's a major company that I'd heard about, obviously, because they're a huge international company. Phones up and says, we understand, or no, they said, we want you to automate 2 of our factories. In other words, take computers and turn them into run by computers rather than run by people. Well, I've just been mildly near that before because we design machinery and other people design the controls. So really, I'm not qualified. So I'm about ready to tell these guys no, and yet I can't believe why would a huge company like that I've never heard of before, never done anything in that industry, phone me up and want me to automate 2 big plants for them. And I thought, that is really weird. I mean, because I've never done this stuff before. So I thought, I was ready to say, no, that's out of my league. And yet I thought, I'm so desperate. I thought, maybe I should just try to see if I can't cut the deal, get somebody else to do it. Maybe I can get in the middle and make some profit here. So I said, well, when do you want to meet? Today, they wanted to meet. I thought, well, yeah. So they said, are you free? Well, I was about ready to say, well, not really because I'm so busy, but I wasn't busy. So I go to the meeting. I'm in there 15 minutes. And before I went, this is no joke, I got out my books on controls, on PLCs and automation, and I began just memorizing some key words so it looked like I knew what I was talking about. That's exactly what I did. I'm just wailing through these and looking at headings on the books, because I had some books on it, because I had to know that a little bit about that stuff to know what to hire somebody else to do when we're developing machinery. So I go through and I learn these terms. So when I get down there, I'm just keeping it on the few terms that I know. If it deviates, I bring it back to the things that it sounds like I know what I'm talking about. Well, we're into this meeting for about 15, 20 minutes. And he said, I'm trying to put the sales pitch on here, and I have no idea why I'm doing this. I have no idea how I'm going to find somebody else to do it for me and how I'm going to quote, because I don't even know the industry. So So I'm putting the thing, he says, yeah, okay, when can you start? And I thought, well, don't tease me here, or whatever. And I says, well, we could do this too. He says, yeah, I know. When can you start? And so I thought, boy, it kind of sounds like he wants to give me the job, and yet I don't know anything about it. He hasn't seen anything we've done, nothing. Huge company. And so I'm thinking, well, I thought I better say 2 weeks because, we're busy, obviously, if we're good at this. But I was so desperate, I says, no, Monday. This is like Thursday. And so he says, fine. He says, gets out the purchase orders. Now, you in business will know this is completely haywire. He gets out purchase orders. He signs a purchase order, blank. Nothing on it, except my company name and signed on the bottom. No hourly rates, nothing. Hands it to me. And then I'm thinking, oh man, I'm going to need to buy all the hardware, like all the PLCs and all the control stuff. I can't afford anything. I got no lines of credit, nothing. So I said, oh, by the way, I probably need a few more purchase orders, like I'm scratching now, to buy the hardware. Yeah, okay, how many do you need? I saw maybe 10 of them. He signs 10 of them, hands them to me blank. I'm looking at these things and I figure, what am I supposed to do? Hand them back so we can fill them out? And then I'm looking at these things and he says, oh, yeah, wait a second, how much do you want? And so I hand the first one back to him. Like who does that? Now all of a sudden, this is so weird that I'm beginning to get a hint here. This is beyond anything human, because that guy's either crazy, I'm not a good salesman, I don't even know what I'm talking about, and all of a sudden I'm landing a purchase order, blank first, and now he's asking me, after he tells me I have the job, it's already signed, now he's asking how much do I want? Well, I would have put down $15 an hour at that point, anything, just to get the work. And I was about ready to just give him a lowball offer, and I thought, wait a second, this is so strange, this has got to be a God thing. So I gave him my highest rates I normally have ever charged. He says, fine. He writes it down, hands it back to me. I couldn't believe it. I went home from that, not even knowing what I'm going to do. I pray all the way home, God, send me somebody that can do this stuff and help me figure out how to quote on this stuff. And then I had this real impression, maybe God will give me the wisdom to know how to do this stuff. And I made this deal the day before, 2 days before, but I have 2 mornings in now. I go home, and I immediately begin to dig into my books. I immediately phone up the companies that supply the hardware and everything else, and you know what? It just started falling together, and I thought, I can't believe what is going on here. I work 60-hour weeks at a high and hourly rate, 60 hours a week. I mark the hardware all up heavily, because that's what you do in the industry. And I'm working month in, month out. Okay, so that's a godsend job. Everybody agree? I mean, there's no question. I don't know, because and then the neat thing about it was, I didn't know what I'm doing. It was my first time ever into it. It's a huge number of input and outputs on this whole system, and the thing worked flawless the day we started it. But that's not the exciting part of the story. I have a deal with God, and I'm spending an hour a day with him. I realized he sent me an indication that this is the deal he wants me to stick with. This is the deal, because he gave me this sign that's so powerful, it's beyond human explanation. So I get up the third morning, thinking, okay, now he gave me this huge, unbelievable thing yesterday, so today's going to be it. I couldn't pray for more than 5-10 minutes, that's about it. Couldn't think of anything else to pray. Started reading the Bible, got nothing out of it. 5 days, 6 days, 7 days go by, I don't miss a morning. I'm getting nothing out of it. A week goes by, 2 weeks. 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Now I begin to notice something in my life. Now I'm getting more spiritually parched than I've ever been in my life. God is beginning to withdraw his presence from me the more I spend this hour in the morning with him. And by the time I get to 6 weeks, never missing a morning, 6 weeks, I can no longer sleep at night because all I can think about is, why can't I have you, Jesus? I couldn't work in the day out of complete frustration of, why isn't this working? You sent me this clear indication. I'm making all this money, getting out of debt hugely fast. I'm spending all this time. How can this be? How can you expect me to, for the rest of my life, hang on to you when I get zero out of the deal I made with you? And I kept the deal up till I got to 60 days, because I kept track. I knew exactly when I started the deal, And at 60 days, 2 full months, I got up that morning. I knew exactly, amid having this job yet, still going on, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I'd almost forgotten about the miraculous part of the job. I get up that morning, 5:30 in the morning, I go upstairs. I didn't feel like kneeling to pray. I didn't feel like sitting to pray. And I'm not some melodramatic person, but I was so frustrated I laid on the floor in the dark upstairs at 5:30 in the morning. I clenched my fists and I said, I am so sick and tired of this, Chase. I've had enough of you. I don't even believe you're real anymore. The whole thing has just been a waste of my time. I don't want anything more to do with you. I'm out of here. And I got up from that prayer. And after you've, intellectually anyways, believe God's real, and you do that, I had a semi-anxiety attack going on in my stomach. And I stood there in the dark, truly wanting to do what I just did. And I thought of my options. Should I go back to bed? Why? I haven't been able to sleep in 2 weeks. Should I go to work? I haven't been able to work in 2 weeks. Well, that's my only options. Well, there's the Bible. Why would I pick that rag up anymore? And in the dark, I thought about my 3 options there as I just frustratingly sat around. And something prompted me to pick that Bible up one more time. And I did. I flicked on the light. I started to read. And I want to tell you something. For the first time in my life, everything I read skipped my brain and hit my heart. I began to sob. I began to cry like a baby because you know what it's like when you try to intellectualize anything, especially the Bible, where you try to read something 10 times, 15 times and try to grasp it, and just when it's sort of like you're getting a mirage of what it's all about, you try to feed it into applying to your life and then it disappears. Forget about it. It skipped my mind. It went right to my heart. I didn't have to intellectualize or cerebralize anything. It went right to my heart. And I read for 2 hours as the most impact thing I've ever experienced in my life. And I thought this will probably never happen again. And then I had to go to meetings, so I had to quit reading. I got up the next morning. I thought, okay, be careful here now. Don't get excited because this may never happen again. Maybe this is a one-shot deal because it was miraculous what happened. Because the words, when it skipped my brain and went to my heart, what I am saying is this. It was like I was a dry sponge who hadn't seen water in years, and now for the first time it was having water being sucked into it. It was like somebody was suffocating me, and now all of a sudden they let go, and I was getting breaths of fresh air. That's what it was like to read Scripture that morning. I got up the next morning, and it was there again. And my life changed, and my life exploded. I felt power like I've never had in my life before. I felt relevance like I never had in my life before. I felt this sense of being invincible. I'd go to business deals, and I had power when I walked in because God was clearly my partner. He was clearly working with me. And then I began to see people out in the world, and I began to see that they were empty. And the roads that I had traveled of popularity, trying to get popularity and accomplishments and all these things, the things that led to nothing in my life, they were running down those paths. And yet they were missing the only thing that brought me relevance, the only thing that brought me a sense of power, true power. And I began to look at other people and say, I know what the answer is, and yet I feared sharing what I had because they'd think I'm crazy. I feared sharing to CEOs of major corporations that, hey, I know you're empty. You have to be. There's a God-shaped vacuum in every man. There's a void in you. I know it because I've experienced it for 38 years of my life. I'd like to tell you what I have, but I'm too chicken. I'm afraid that you think I'm nuts. I'm afraid it might blow the deal. But when you begin to taste the reality of what it's like to connect with God, you can't shut up about it. And I began opening my mouth to people I would never dream of opening my mouth up to. And their lives begin to change. The billionaire I told you about last night, to finish the story up tonight, you know what I shared with him that made him say, what you have is what I desperately needed, want through tears? He was crying. He said, I got this void in my life I can't fill. I knew what he's talking about because I've been there. Not a billionaire, but I know exactly what he's going through. When I got on that deck of his palatial home in Vancouver there, I said, Albert, before I do business with anybody, I got to tell you where I'm coming from. I'm a Christian. I don't know if you are or not, doesn't matter. But before I do business, I got to let you know where I'm coming from. My life is this. I have power. I have a sense of direction. I have a reason to get up in the morning. When I'm kicked around during the day and I come home at night feeling bruised and beaten up by the world, I can psychologically, at a minimum, whether God is real or not is almost irrelevant, but psychologically, I can unload on someone bigger than myself. And when he realized that I had found something that allows me to get off the high horse, that allows me to get away from the pressure. And he's a billionaire with assets all over the world, and he can't get off. When he realized I had that, he began to cry. And when he heard my full testimony of what I did and how I found this God who makes a difference, in the middle of my conversation, he stops me, he says, before he began to cry, he stops me, he says, I don't know when I have ever met anybody with more confidence than you. And you know what I told him? I said, I believe that the God and creator of the universe is my partner. Why wouldn't I be? And when I shared all my testimony with him, that was his very words. What you have is what I desperately need and want. Do you know how relevant that made me feel to realize the billionaire who has everything wants what I have? I tell you, that is the most exciting thing that happens in my life. The most relevant thing in my life is to see the most amazing things you would ever imagine take place. The amazing, call them coincidences if that's all you want to call them, but the amazing setups to see people's lives. I got on the airplane flying from Seattle, Washington, across the country to Michigan. And with all the security stuff in the U.S., now I had to drive 3 hours south to get to Seattle, and Seattle's got bad rush hour, if any of you know the outlay. But anyways, it's 3 hours south of where I live in Canada, Seattle, Washington, USA. I drive down. I had to give myself a contingency of time because if the rush hour is bad, I had to give myself a contingency of time to get through the tight security in the U.S. and all the airports. And I gave myself so much contingency, I was at the airport 2 hours early. Well, that's okay. Why? Because I like watching people. So I was doing that. You know, some people go to the zoo and watch primates. I go and watch postmates or whatever you want to call them. Is that even a word? Doesn't matter. I like watching people. So I'm in the airport and I'm watching people, and this well-dressed individual over to my right caught my attention quite early on. And I got this huge curiosity. My wife's, every time she's with me and I'm traveling and I start looking at someone a little bit too long and I start to twitch, she knows I'm going to get up and start talking and asking questions because my curiosity doesn't let me sit there. I got to go find out what they do or whatever. So she's always yards me down. She wasn't there, but I assumed she was there, so I didn't go over right away. I didn't even go over, period. But I'm watching this guy for an hour and a half. And I'm thinking, well, I wonder what he does. Like, he's just packaged. He's just a super good-looking guy. He's dressed to the nines. He's got to be successful. And wonder what he does. And I look at him now and then and try to imagine what he might be doing. And about a half an hour before the flight, he gets up and leaves, and he's gone a long time. Then he comes back. When he comes back, he's got this great big sweet roll in cellophane and a can of Coke. So what? But you know what? I looked at it, I thought, who could eat something so tacky as that, a big sweet roll, and then a Coke to chase it down? I mean, I'm not some health freak or anything else, but I mean, that much frosting and that much, it just turned me off. And I thought, sick. And so I'm watching him, and guess what? He unwraps the cellophane off this big sweet roll, and now his fingers are all full of frosting, and then he goes and pops the can, the lid, and they call their flight right then. Okay, start to board. Well, I'm wondering, what is he going to do? Is he going to just throw it in the garbage, or is he going to try to get this thing down? So as I'm going through the line, I look back, as I'm starting to get in line. You know what the guy does? He takes the entire sweet roll. This is Mr. GQ. He takes the entire sweet roll, jams it in his mouth in one bite, and he's taking his thumb and trying to get all the little pieces stuck in there. And I thought, what a slob. And of course, I go fishing with my buddies, and we male bond. There are no rules. And then I come home and I have to get deprogrammed. It takes me about 2 weeks to get deprogrammed from 1 week into fishing. But anyhow, I'm looking at him, I think, what a slob. I mean, what a pig to do that in public. So I just got worked up instantly in this tizzy. I thought, this is just pathetic. Who would do that in public? And so just before I get walking down the gangplank into the plane, I look back, and you know what he's doing now? He's over the garbage can with the wad, and he's trying to wash it down with the can of pop. Because how do you get the pop in there when it's plugged? Brilliant thought, so he does it over the garbage can. So I'm going down the gangplank, I'm thinking, I mean, that is so sick, what a pig. So I get on the airplane, and I know all the different kinds of airplanes because I travel a lot, and so the A340, the doors here, and you got a front row, and you got a big bulkhead here. It's sort of like, if you get the aisle exit row there, it's sort of like first class, even though it's cheap wad seats. So, because you got lots of leg room, and so I got the seat I wanted. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the door to see when the slob's coming in, and there's an empty seat here, and there's somebody over by the window. And so I'm watching, and everybody's in, and the slob hasn't come yet. And then guess what? He comes in, they're waiting for him. And he comes in, he's licking his fingers. And then the scary thing was this. He takes his ticket and begins to compare it with the rows right away. Well, if you're a row 40, you just hang it right and boot it to the back. No, he's going like this. And I bet you can guess where he sat. Right next to me. So before he could sit, I threw my elbow out there to take the armrest. It's mine. I was there first. I didn't say a word to the guy. He didn't say a word to me. He sat down. I made sure I had my elbow fully on that thing. It's first class for me on this trip. And so then so he's sitting there. Don't say a word. He doesn't. So we're just cold as ice, both of us. We taxi out, we take off. We're in the air 45 minutes. And you know what all I can think about? What did the guy have to sit next to me for? I don't even care what he does. He's just a pig anyways, and so I'm just worked up in this tizzy. I can't even relax. So I thought, I'm going to get the movie, whether it's a dumb one or not, so when they're getting ready to get the headphones out, they come to the front of the plane, we're the first ones, and so the stewardess comes there, and I'm ready to go for it, and I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't, because I got to go speak at a theological seminary the next day. I better at least figure out what I might be talking about. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm not going to get the thing. He got the movie headsets and didn't even put them on. That was weird. And so I'm sitting there and thinking, okay, what am I going to talk about tomorrow? I got to get my head straight here. This guy next to me is bugging me, so I can't even think anyways. And so I thought, well, usually every time I get an airplane, I have an amazing encounter with somebody, and their irrelevant life becomes relevant because what I've shared, what happened to me. And I thought, not today. And the second I thought, not today, everything just all of a sudden came just into my face. Why not today? And why, you who are the least of all cultured beings, according to my wife anyways, you're all upset at this guy. Who cares? And I thought about it. I thought, that is weird. Why would I be all upset? And you know what I realized? The old devil, the other power, had no sweat, just sucking me right in. Oh yeah, you just lead him around with the ring in his nose. He's easy. And I realized that's what happened. So under my breath, I said, in the name of Jesus, get lost. And then I prayed, God, let me see this man through the eyes of your son, Jesus. And you know what? Immediately, I felt warmth and compassion for this guy. And I turned to him and said, well, how are you doing? Well, you can imagine the poor guy's response 45 minutes into the flight. This bipolar or whatever wakes up, and now, just a minute ago, he's frosty, and now all of a sudden he's Mr. Nice. And he's a bit shocked, and he says, fine, and I says, so where are you going? Oh, Washington, D.C. What are you doing there? Well, I'm on the U.S. Energy Commission. And I says, what do you do? Well, I'm a professor at a major university in Washington State, and they put me on loan for a week, once a month, on the U.S. Energy Commission. This guy's important. That's a pretty hot commission. So I said, well, that's cool. And he says, what about you? Well, now he's warming up. I says, well, I'm going to Michigan. He says, what are you doing there? I said, I'm going to preach. He says, what do you mean preach? Well, that's a hard one to answer if somebody has to ask that. And so I said, well, preach, like talk about God. And he says, oh, so you're a Christian? I says, yeah, I am. He says, well, I don't believe there is a God. I said, oh, okay. And he said, I suppose you believe you're created as well. And I says, well, it's irrelevant whether I believe that or not. If you don't believe God's real, it's irrelevant. And so, like I'm getting a little bit defensive, and yet at the same time, I thought this is pretty unusual. He lets me know he doesn't believe there's a God. He's an atheist. So I thought, okay, and I've dealt with a lot of atheists before. They're more hungry than anybody else. And so I said, well, okay. I said, here's the point. It doesn't matter whether God's real or not. It's totally irrelevant. Absolutely irrelevant. That's what I tell any atheist, because they want to argue, is God real? Yes, he is. No, he isn't. Yes, he is. Nobody wins. So it's irrelevant. I said, what I'd like to talk about is belief systems. I said, if you don't mind, I'll share you what I believe briefly. He says, yeah, go ahead. I said, well, here's what I believe. Yeah, I believe I was created. Whether God's real or not, it's irrelevant. I believe that. I said, well, you know what that does? That opens the door that maybe there's a reason for my life. Maybe there's a purpose for my life. I said, you know what that does for me every day, believing that there's a purpose for my life? It gives me power. It gives me a competitive edge in the workplace. It makes me think that I've got something on my side that nobody else has. At a minimum, psychologically, I have an advantage. And you know what? I also believe that at the end of my life, when I die, I look forward to eternal life. I said, so I have purpose and power today and hope for the future. Now, if you don't mind, I'll tell you what you believe. And he was quite happy probably to know. Maybe he doesn't know what he believes. So I said, here's what you believe. You believe you've evolved from a lower form of animal life. It's fine, whether God's real or not, believe that. But I said, you know what that does? Slams the door there's any reason for your life. And I said, if there's no reason for your life, you've got no purpose. That means you have no power. So you're living a survival of the fittest rat race life right now with no purpose whatsoever. And then I said, and furthermore, you're accumulating all this stuff in your life, toys, whatever it is. I don't know what you collect or whatever, but you're collecting all this stuff. And when you die, you're going to rot in the ground, and everybody around you is going to fight over the assets you had. Now, you know, of all the things you can believe in society, I told him, all the haywire beliefs you could have, whether God's real or not, is irrelevant. I would rather have a belief system that gives me purpose and power today and hope for the future, rather than no purpose today and no hope for the future. And then I said, furthermore, and I had my little slimline NIV Bible in my briefcase, and I hauled it out. I said, don't worry, I'm not here to preach to you. But I said, this is the textbook for the Christian. I said, everywhere this book has been since its inception, there has been controversy. There's been world wars started over this book. I said, in fact, right now, still in the United States, there's arguments whether this belongs in the libraries of the public high schools of the United States. But I said, you're an intelligent man, you'll understand this. The people who say that it doesn't belong in the libraries of the public high schools of the United States say that it's fictitious and that it's a myth. So I said, let me ask you a question. If it's fictitious and a myth, what's the threat? What is the threat? And I said, and furthermore, my King James Version, which is Old English, belongs on the same shelf as Shakespeare, with no more threat to society, if it's a myth, than Shakespearean writings. No more threat. It's just literature. Plug it there next to Shakespeare with no more threat. I said, but let me ask you a question. If this book were real, what do you think the results would be? Boy, talk about a long silence. And he said, I would expect there would be controversy. I said, that's right. Because it's real. I said, you know what my life is like? And I shared my whole testimony of pursuing all these avenues that I thought was going to feed me and give me relevance. And I told him how I finally found relevance. And when he recognized that I truly do, whether it's psychological or whether it's real, because there is a real God or not, he realized I had an edge that he didn't have in life, just because I had a belief system at a minimum. So I share with him, and he begins to want to know what I believe. And he says, you know, the most logical explanation for how it all began to me is Space Odyssey 2000 movie. I don't even know what that is. I hadn't seen it, but whatever it is, that's what he was talking. So we talked all the way. He said, you know, I'm not without a religious influence. I said, oh, really? And he says, when I was in 6th grade, my parents moved to Florida in the United States. And the schools were so rough with gangs and everything else, they put me in a Presbyterian school for 2 years, and the next year in a Catholic school. So I've had some, you know, religious influence. And I said, well, that's neat, you know. And so we talk all the way to Chicago. By that time, like 3.5 hours, all the way, because that's where I was landing first, in Chicago. So we talk all the way. As we're descending, and we had an amazing discussion. And he's talking about how his marriage life is really rocky right now, and he has no time for his kids, and he's just being torn from every angle with this commission there and his professorship and everything else. You know, PhD professors, lots of demands on him and everything else. So as we're descending into Chicago, of course, we got to know each other by then. I said, Rob, can I challenge you? And he said, yeah, sure, go ahead. I said, here's what I want you to do. I said, this may seem stupid. I said, in fact, you're going to probably think I'm stupid. I don't care. I said, you get yourself a Bible. And I want you to spend 1 hour every morning reading that Bible. If you have to read it as literature first just to satisfy yourself, do it. I says, I will guarantee that in 2 months, your life will explode with relevance. You will have what I have. You will finally know what it's like to understand there's something bigger along with you than just trying to go through life by yourself. I said, I will guarantee that. And I said, and furthermore, here's my business card. I pulled out my wallet, gave my business card, because I wanted to keep communicating with this guy. I said, I want you to log every hour you spend reading that book, the Bible. If your life doesn't explode with relevance, like I promised it will, because I said, I guarantee with every part of my soul that your life will explode with relevance. If it doesn't, I said, you send me a bill for all your wasted time. Whatever the university pays you, I will send you a check for your wasted time. He says, well, I can hardly deny that. So we get off the airplane. I email him first because he was longer away. I got home sooner than he was away. I email him. And I give him a few scriptural references. I took him to Deuteronomy 28. I wanted him to know what God says he wants. God says in Deuteronomy 26, 18 and 19, he says, I will make you head and shoulders above all people in honor and respect in the name. And Deuteronomy 20 says, you'll be the head and not the tail. So I gave him some scriptural references like that. 10 days later, here is the exact letter I got back. Email. From this PhD professor who said there is no God. Herb. Oh, and while I was sharing with him all the way to Chicago, I told him about other people like him who have given it a try and their life exploded with relevance. So he understood that maybe I'm not some freak of nature, that maybe it could happen to him. Herb, it was nice to hear from you. Not surprisingly, given your track record, you had a real influence on me. While in D.C., I spent some time each morning with the Bible for the first time in years. Last time was in his parochial school. I also started to develop a prayer list for the first time in decades. I started listing what I wanted to pray for those closest to me. Interestingly, by the time I got to the third person, I found I couldn't go on until I had added a line for each person, summarizing what I could do to help these things come about, as if God had said, not so fast, we're in this together, bucko. You know what this guy's getting in 10 days already? He's realizing that maybe rather than just offering up a prayer like, please be with the people in China. Well, thanks, Herb. God speaking now. Thanks, Herb. I forgot all about them. Glad you brought it up. Or maybe Herb can use his life to help the people in China. He's getting that. 10 days. I also developed a little prayer to use as part of my weekly and daily planning, seeking guidance from God, and have shared this with two other guys here on the U.S. Energy Commission, interested in a mutually supportive weekly meeting to help each other stay on track. He got back there and told these guys about this haywire guy I saw on the airplane. He's going to give it a try. He now tells them, they say, wow, maybe this is something. They get this three-way pact, so they're constantly emailing each other to make sure they stay on track. The center of his letter says this. This week I have tons of meetings and deliverables. Well, I'm going to read the whole thing. Anyways, he's busy. His daughter's going on a 3-day camping trip. He would never do this. He says, not my M.O. He's going on the 3-day camp trip. His son's on a 21-mile bike-a-thon. There's 31 parents for 50 kids, so he doesn't even need to go, but he's going on the 21-mile bike-a-thon. And here's how he ends this. As I lay these things out in this email, I am struck by how much I am changing. Was that ever a relief to me to hear that word changing? Because I don't owe the guy anything, and he probably made more money than I maybe thought. As I lay these things out in this meeting, I'm struck with how much I'm changing, and largely due to my chance meeting with you. Thank you very much. I'll check out those scriptures. I hope your trip went well. I wrote him back. I said, there is no chance. There is no chance. God needs you. God wants you. You know where that guy is today? He is living the most relevant life he could imagine. His wife and kids, when he decided to do this, they thought he was nuts. He's now teaching Sunday school in a Foursquare Gospel Church up in Spokane, Washington. His wife and kids said, you're crazy. He wrote me 6 months ago now. They're going to church with him. The whole family, his marriage is better. Everybody's enjoying it. Their life is relevant. He's got purpose. He's got direction. And you know what I get from him now every 2 weeks, mails, as well as everybody out there in his whole network? He sends these little spiritual anecdotes, emails them, spam mail. I get them from him every 2 weeks. It doesn't say, Dear Herb, but you know what it does to my soul to see that he's the one sending them now? That is relevance. That is relevance. Landing the multi-million-dollar deal is boring stuff. compared to sharing where relevance is and having somebody else find it as well. My life is worth living every morning. I have the glorious honor and opportunity of sharing Christ every day in the workplace. And I want to tell you something. The world is empty. Why? Because it's in the middle of doing the same thing I've done for 38 years of my life, looking for relevance in all the wrong places, never being able to find it. And the higher you get, the emptier you get, and the fewer the options you have to try to fill that void anymore. And for me to sit back and have what I have, this sense of power, this sense of accomplishment, meaning I've finally got this void filled. And not to share that with someone else is something I can't even begin to comprehend anymore. My life finally turned in that direction that I had sought for so many years. And that empty void, that suffocating feeling of never being able to quite get where, I don't even know where, but never quite get to the end of whatever I was chasing, was finally filled. And it's filled every day of my life, and it's the most exciting thing I would ever want to be involved with. I challenge anybody, if you're a Christian and your life isn't explosive, I mean you sense power, I mean every day is exciting because your life is impacting the world. If you aren't experiencing that, the next 3 nights I'm going to be talking about how you find Jesus. And that seems like, oh, well, we all know that. But you know what? Nobody, all those years of going to Christian school, all those years of going to evangelistic campaigns or whatever influence I had from quotes, Christians or religion or whatever, nobody ever sat me down and told me what it takes to have a relationship with Jesus and then have an explosive life after that. That's what I'm going to share the next 3 nights. It'll take 3 nights to get through it. 3 separate things need to take place, and I will guarantee you follow that, you will have an explosive life. And if you don't know Jesus now, make the assumption, just simply make the assumption that maybe God is real. That's all you have to do for a decision, is an assumption. Don't have to decide God's real. Just assume that maybe He's real and give it a try, because I guarantee with every fiber, if there is a fiber to a soul, that your life will explode with relevance.